All right, so we are going to work on the Lecture 5 demo files. If you haven't done so, download them. I highly suggest you follow along because then you'll get a feel for the materials a little bit better. Also, download the SAL Look Development Guide for Materials. It's a PDF file. All these can be found at the bottom of Lesson 5 activity. And then also download the Project 5 bread and the thermos reference. All right, so first thing you want to do is launch my set your project to the Lecture 5 demo files. Once you've done that, we're going to go in and verify that a couple things are loaded. For one, I've got an HDR image in there. It's the Zen Garden that you guys have been using. So that's going to be in there. And basically it's a helix and a sphere. We're just going to experiment with playing around with them to get different material properties. We're going to try and get the 3 basic material properties that I showed you in the slides for the mouse. We're also going to play around a little bit with some of the metal materials so you get a feel for that. Then we'll talk about some look development. All right, render man loaded. So set project. There we go. All right, a couple things to do first. Once your scene is loaded is select the dome light and go into the attributes and relink the HDR image that we provided for you. How do I know you'll have to do that? Because when you click on it, it shows up as a gray blank. That just means it needs to be relinked because this was reshuffled around from my directory structure to yours, and it's going to be slightly different. So just click on the folder icon next to color map, go to source images, select the HDR, give it a second, click open, and then you should get a preview. Once you get that preview, you should be good to go. You can save your scene. That way you don't have to go through this again if you open it up. Everybody okay? Question? Did you download the Project 5 demo? And in source images, like go to your desktop and go in source images, is the HDR image in there? It should be. Is it there? Yeah. Good. All right, so when you go to relink it up, it may take you to the whole folder structure. You just have to go inside source images and then click on it to relink it. Who else had a question? Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to actually link it up again.
Well, you go inside your attributes, color map, click on the folder icon next to it, go inside source images, select your Zen Garden HDR, and then click open. And then that should give you the preview inside the attributes. May take a second or two to pop in, but it eventually does. Did you get it? Good. Who else had a question? Anybody else? Okay. Now, next thing you want to do is let's assign a separate Pixar surface to the ground plane and a separate Pixar surface for the helix and the sphere. They can both have the same material, but the ground needs to have its own. So select the ground plane, Shift T, Pixar surface, rename it, this way you know it is ground. today's going to be important because not all of your props now are going to have the same material. That was easy before. You just select everything, assign a Pixar surface, you're done. This is going to be a little different. All right, so for the ground, let's put the color at 0.5 for the value, just like we would normally do. Another thing to do once you've done that is select the helix and the sphere and give them a separate material. All right, so helix, sphere. I'm going to give that a value of 0.5 as well. Now, yes?
What surface did you make the ground again?
Pixar surface. It's going to have its own material, and the helix and the sphere are going to have the same material. So total, you're just going to have two different materials for now in your scene. We're just trying to keep the ground separate. That way when we change the surfaces on the helix and the sphere, the ground still remains different. So we get it some contrast, basically. All right. Everybody with me so far? Good. All right, so next thing we're going to do is go into your render settings. Go to Advanced tab, and make sure you turn on Linearize Colors. If not, everything will be way too blown out. In fact, let me show you what it looks like rendered without Linearize and then with Linearize. This way you can get an idea for why we do it. All right, so quick render from perspective. This is without linearized colors turned on. All right, I'm going to stop that. Don't need to see it. Now I'm going to turn on linearize. Click close, and actually, yeah, I'm just going to leave everything else the same. Let's just re-render. All right, so without linearize and then with linearize. That's why we choose linear. That way the light falls, or at least it captures the image more along the lines with the way real light falls in the real world. All right, so first thing we're going to do is just play around a little bit with the helix and the sphere. And to do that, we're just going to go in and under artistic mode, let's take, actually I'm going to run IPR while this is going on. This way we can see the changes as we make them. All right, so now what I'm going to do is take my edge color and turn it all the way up. Artistic mode. Notice the edge of my object now became very shiny. Can you guys see that? Right here. And that's basically my 90-degree angle. Most things appear very reflective at a glancing or a 90-degree angle. Now, as I start to increase my face color, I'm starting to add reflectivity little by little. So by the time I'm about a quarter to a third of the way up, I can start to see some environment reflections in there. Yes? They do have numerical values. They're 0 and 1. But since they're in channels that are mappable, it's an RGB kind of thing. Not RGB, it's Maya's HSV, hue saturation value. Right now, all we're changing is value information, which is lightness and darkness. Think of it, like I said, as an intensity slider for now. The only time we ever plug colors into here is when we're working with metals. And we're trying to get that reddish color for metal. Now, right now, we're dealing with the default roughness of 0.2. So as I turn it up about halfway, now my material is half reflective and half diffuse. If I turn off my roughness all the way, I will have crystal clear reflections. And notice what happened to my sun. It became a pinpoint now. It's no longer spread out like it was before. But I've got much clearer reflections. Now, in the real world, hardly any objects have 0 roughness in them, even mirrors. You know, there's always just a little bit of roughness just to add a little bit of realism to it. So generally, I just like to crank this up just a little bit sometimes, just to add a little bit of reality to it. Nothing is perfect. Another thing to remember when you're dealing with color now, because today is all about color and reflectivity, nothing is pure black. It is really dark gray, but not pure black. The only thing that's pure black is that Vanta black. The stuff that basically absorbs all light rays and kind of looks like a black hole. Really dark gray. Right now, by the time I turn my face color up, like around 3/4, now it's starting to become mirror-like. But it's really bright and hot and white looking. And most of that is due to my diffuse color. So if I turn this all the way up, my whites in the sky are completely blown out. Now, whenever we deal with a lot of reflectivity, and by a lot of reflectivity I mean we're trying to make a mirror, not necessarily a conductive metal, we're going to turn the color in the diffuse down. Now watch what happens when I turn that down. That's going to take on a more mirror-like look. Because most mirrors have that silver oxide coated back along with a black backing on it. As opposed to this. This is pure white. That will burn your retinas out. So, not absolute black. I'm really close to it. If I want to get really close, I can just go in here. That's really close. That's good enough. Yes? My highlight did not actually disappear. It's the roughness that made it appear that way. The sun, it's a direct light source, instead of it getting spread out with roughness, it's contracted to be the size. It's still there, but it's a pinpoint. It's really hard to see. If I turn my roughness up, you'll start to see it. You see it? It's just that when stuff is really smooth, it does not exaggerate the direct light highlight. Yes? Did you relink your image in? I would stop IPR. go into the dome light attributes and relink your HDR image up. Most of the time, that missing background is going to be caused by the image either missing or good. All right, so this would be a mirror, for want of a better word. Right, I'm going to stop this IPR and just kind of leave that as a baseline reference. We'll compare it to what we get when we start talking about metals. So, to get this, all I did was, I'm in artistic, edge color went all the way up, face color went all the way up. My diffuse color, I changed to black because I don't want that milky, grayish diffuse color bleeding into my mirror. Remember, when I increased the value in the mirror or in the diffuse, it made everything much brighter. Right. Did that make sense so far? Questions? Yes. Yep. Only go, yeah, remember the render view or the viewport can't display accurately what material properties are. So always go by your image tool image. All right, so next thing, let's kick off IPR again. And I'm going to turn this back to the defaults. The defaults being edge color was off, face color was off, and my diffuse color was 0.5. Back to a simpler time when we can all enjoy Pepperidge Farm. All right, now let's bring up the reference for the mouse. Let's try and play around and see if we can get those properties. So let's start working with this one right here. Smooth. What color? Yeah, really dark gray. But yeah. The level of reflectivity, fairly high. Right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up my edge color. I'm going to make my object, my diffuse, really dark. Now that looks pretty good. Now, with my color really dark and just my edge color, you can see how far my 90-degree or edge reflectivity extends to the front. Does that make sense? I have not turned up face color at all. Nothing facing the camera is reflective. It's diffuse. So it kind of gives it a weird look. And that's what this Fresnel exponent does. So notice as I turn down the exponent, now my 90-degree is shifting around towards the front of my face. With just a little bit of dark in the middle. So I'm forcing that edge color or that edge reflectivity to go more towards the front. The default's 5. If I go above 5, now I'm kind of choking off that edge color, so it's really constrained to just a narrow sliver on the edges. Can you see that? Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because every once in a while you run across kind of a weird reflective material that's coated. It might be a reflective material that's coated with, I'm thinking of things like metallic looking glass where they coat it with a glaze, and then it takes on kind of a strange reflective property on the edges and on the face. So in that case, maybe there's a little more face or a little more edge reflectivity. All right, I'm going to return that to 5, which is the default. Yes?
Does this edge reflection change if there was another light source for you?
No. This is just how the material is responding to the light in the environment. So technically I do have 2 light sources in my scene. I've got a distant light right here, and I've got a dome light. So my dome light wraps around it. My distant light is just there for shadows, for the sun. You can see there's my pinpoint light here, and then there's the dome on the edges. You can have as many lights as you want. It's just how that material is responding to reflectivity. We're controlling it. All right, so based on what we see here, this definitely has face color or face reflectivity. Right, so we're going to crank up the face reflectivity. How much? It's going to be based on our reference here. Now, if I turn it up too high, then it becomes fully reflective. So I have to kind of balance with how reflective it is versus how dark that color needs to be. So we're trying to get basically the look and feel of this material right here. Now this probably has a little bit of roughness in it, so I'm going to turn my roughness up just a little bit. Because like I said, nothing is perfectly smooth. Now, I've got multiple light sources in my image of the mouse because I've got it under my lamp at my desk. I've got some overhead lights going on. But how does that match up against the reference? So I'm looking at kind of the blue from my screen. I got a lot of blue here. If I turn up the amount of reflectivity, that's going to get brighter. What I'm trying to do is balance the color and the reflectivity. All right, does that make sense? Questions? Yes. The highlight here, that's all based on roughness. If I turn my roughness off, that highlight basically becomes really small. As I increase roughness, it spreads out. So my image here, not very rough. There's a little bit of roughness in it. It's not perfect. That's why I usually like to have a little bit of roughness in most of my objects. So, when you're looking at an image, first off, what color is it? How reflective is it? How rough is it? If you answer those 3 questions, you're about 95% of the way to figuring out what to do with the material. Color, how reflective, how rough. Sometimes you can even control how reflective it is by how rough it is. The rougher the material, the less reflective it's going to be. It's going to start diffusing everything. It's going to get really, coarse. All right, so I'm going to stop this. This will be my reference for that. And let's try the next one. Right, so first thing I want to do, let's try adjusting the color a little bit. I'm going to kick off my, let's see. Ah, that's better. There we go. At least I can see the reference a little bit. All right, kick off an IPR again. And let's adjust the color. So what color would you say that is? Yeah. Exactly. Yes, that's why you guys build stuff in parts, because technically these parts all have different materials assigned to them. If not, they have seams, which are much easier to do if you've got actual light and shadow in them. But generally, things are built in different pieces because they are made of different materials. So, good catch. That's exactly why we model stuff like that. All right, so color. Definitely not dark gray. Right, kind of a medium-ish gray, maybe. And let's see, definitely rougher, right? So now we have to start increasing roughness. The default is 0.2, so let's look at 0.2. 0.2 rough enough? Nope, definitely not. Because this shape right here, that's my bar light right above. And that's pretty blurred out. So let's increase roughness again. I mean, you can use the slider. Personally, I just like to go in increments just to see what they look like. All right, now we're starting to get somewhere. The light is starting to spread out. Take it up another notch. Right now, is it reflective enough? That's what we need to kind of look at. No, not really, because I can still see some shapes and color here, and everything here is a little too muted. So let's crank up the reflectivity a little. Now it's a little more reflective. Is it rough enough? Yeah, it might be. All right, so here's something else to keep in mind too. Let me put this back up to full size. Get out of the way. What are you doing? There we go. All right. Remember we talked about 90-degree reflectivity? If you take a look up here, it's really dead on the screen, but it is more reflective on the edges of my object than it is here. Again, towards that 90-degree reflection, things are much more reflective. So that still tells me that my edge color being turned all the way up is still pretty valid. All right, so rough enough? Well, let's see. Let's go up to 0.5 and see. Yeah, it looks a little too much. Looks like I went too far. So, I don't know. Let's try 4 or 5. Kind of halfway in there. All right, color. Too dark, too light. Think it's a little dark compared to that? Yeah, it could be. Lighten it up just a touch. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it could still be a little more reflective. Kind of hard to tell. Alright, let's try and do the last one now. So this one, very rough. We are back to our very dark gray, not black color. Alright, is it rough enough? Nope. Alright, so let's try like 0.5. Let's see how that goes. How about the amount of reflectivity? Too much? Let's turn it down a little. It's starting to take on that sheen here. Let's try a little bit rougher. Alright, so there's our hard black plastic, mouse button, and then the rubber edge. Questions? So, color? How reflective is it? How rough is it? Yes. The Fresnel? Okay. Let me stop. Oh, it is stopped. All right, let me restart this. And let's go. Let's set everybody back to the default. There we go. All right, so let's turn up edge color. So you can see the edge color. Let me turn down the roughness just so we can see what we're dealing with. All right, so this is with absolutely no face color. So my face color, for the most part, is right here in the center. But once I leave that center position, little by little, the edge color starts to kick in. Like it starts to pick up that 90-degree reflectivity. You can tell because I got a little bit of a dot from my light in there. Now this Fresnel exponent will help me adjust. I can have it go more towards the center if I lower it. Now I'm pulling that edge color around more towards the front of my image. Or if I go in the opposite direction, I'm kind of constricting that edge color to just be on the sides. And really we're just interpolating or adjusting where it starts and stops from that 90-degree edge. Does that make sense? So the opposite, if I turned off edge color and just went to face color, you can see I've kind of got my face color it wraps around pretty far. Here's the default. So right now, that's all face color. Let me stop this. There we go. It's a little easier to see when the face is not quite so dominant. But right now I got a black edge, which is basically because I have no edge color. Now, in order for me to make that edge color spread out more, I need to first turn it up. Oh, stop. You have to watch what you do with IPR. It doesn't always catch up. Come on. Put this back. Like I said, it's really hard to see with the edge color or the face color turned way up because it's so dominant. But it's easy to see it with my edge color up, my face color off. Then I can see how much edge color comes around to the front and how much edge color goes to the side. Did that help? Right. Other questions? So pretty much any material that you see in the room, you can make using this method. Except for the metals. Metals are going to look a whole lot different. Let's stop by PR. All right, so 3 resources. One is Pixar material, Pixar surface material. They go through every single attribute that's in the Pixar surface. Diffuse parameters, you click on it, it will take you to the page or that portion of the page that you want. All right. Here's an article. It's a PDF. I know it's kind of nerdy, but if anybody's interested, this tells you exactly why some metals are red. It's basically the long version of what I told you. Some colors are absorbed, other colors are not. They're reflected back. So if you're into the physical part of it, very interesting article. I liked it. Refractive index database. This is where we're going to go to work on what we need to do to make metals, to make conductive materials. Right, so usually the main simple inorganic materials section, that's perfect for us because that contains all the different things we need. Right, so we got silver, we have aluminum, we have gold, we have beryllium. It's the beryllium sphere. Calcium, cobalt, chromium, copper. The only thing with copper is they don't give you the color to put in it. We need to put that in manually. That reddish color. Right, so let's go with, there's mercury, magnesium. Let's go nickel. Nickel is fairly common coating that you find on like a lot of car parts, a lot of things that you generally don't want to rust. It's a fairly hard coating. All right, so nickel. Notice that the refractive index and extinction coefficient changed. We go back to nitrogen, for example. There we go. Nitrogen is a gas, so it does not have an extinction coefficient. Doesn't have a second refractive index. But, let's go back to nickel. And you'll see that the refractive index for nickel is 1.964. The extinction coefficient is 3.835. So what does that mean for us? Well, if we are trying to make a nickel coating on our sphere, first thing we're going to do is switch over from artistic to physical. Once we switch over to physical, edge color generally is going to go all the way up. The refraction index, this is where we grab the number from this database. So the refractive index is 1.964. So into my refractive index, I click on my color swatch, and down here under value, I type in 1.964. Whoop, that's edge color, don't want to change that. Refraction index, 1.964. You could use the other numbers, but it only takes 3 digits. Hit enter to register, come back, get the extinction coefficient, which is 3.835. That gets plugged into the value, 3.835. So now when I render my scene out, I'm going to keep my, oh yeah, when we're doing metal, metal is all reflectivity. So we're going to keep the color at black. In fact, you can even turn the gain off too. Because we generally don't want any diffuse color bleeding into our material. So now when I re-render, that gives me a nickel coating, which looks, let's see, a whole lot different than that. Notice the edges are a little darker. It's got almost like a blue overtone to it, a little more blue than the sky. That's because that's more of a dominant blue reflective light coming back. Yes? I'm sorry, what? On yours? Make sure that your roughness is turned off. I have my roughness off. Yeah, that's probably it. Now, granted, there is some roughness in metal. So I probably will turn it up just a little bit until I actually have reference that shows me how rough my chrome should be, or my nickel should be. But I'll just turn it up just a little bit. Just a little bit of blur on there. All right, let's try another metal. Somebody pick one. Cobalt. Let's see what cobalt does. Now, like I said, you can go in here. This one is Johnson and Christie, measured from 1974. We could go with the one from 2009. Let's see what the difference is. All right, so there is my index of refraction, extinction coefficient using the 1974 model. Let's see what it is for, wow, that's quite different for 2009. All right, let's try them both. Let's do the 1974 model first. Plug those numbers in, render it out, and then compare it with the other. All right, so first thing, index of refraction. So 2.139, index of refraction, 2.139. And I'm lazy, I just copy the numbers and paste them in. So extinction coefficient, 3.984. So extinction coefficient, 3.984. Let's re-render. I don't expect this to be drastically different. Just a little bit different in the, looks like in the reflections a little bit. Well, maybe not. That looks really similar. Let me stop IPR. Let's plug the other set of numbers in, the 2009 numbers. So index of refraction, I'm going to plug in 0.565. Extinction coefficient, this is a bigger number. This is 5.173. Like I said, you can copy those numbers and paste them into the value. Remember, everything we're plugging into is value. We're not doing any hue or saturation. These are all value numbers. All right, let's fire this up again. Be interesting to see, since the numbers are drastically different, what happens. Well, definitely is a lot whiter looking, that's for sure. So this is the 1974 model, and that one is the 2009 model. So I guess, what is it, roughly 25 years? Technology's come a long way, so they can measure things a whole lot more accurately. So nickel, cobalt. Just a little bit different. This is my artistic version of them. That's my mirror, basically. But if you look at the cobalt, the edges are just slightly darker. And again, that is that index of refraction and extinction coefficient, telling it how to reflect light. All right, does this make sense? Questions? Yes?
Whatever we use the physical mode, are we always going to bring the edge color and the use color down?
For the most part, yes, because most of what we see from metal is a result of reflectivity. Unless you have something like this, which is painted, you're probably better off doing this. You might try physical. If you don't get the results, you might go to artistic. It's really, in the end, what does this look like when you render it? And the reason I like to use physical for metals is because if you know the metal, you can pretty much guess what it is. You can get it, and you can get it to reflect light a lot easier and more accurately than you can with artistic. Because with artistic, I'd have to go in and adjust the edge color separately from the face color. And that's why here in the cobalt, like that edge right here in the bottom that's close to the ground plane, that's why it's a little bit darker than in the mirror version I made in artistic. It's kind of hard to see, but it's there a little bit. All right, one more metal. Let's do chromium because that's a common one also. Chromium's down there. So index of refraction 3.212. And that goes into the value. Extinction coefficient 3.300. That's pretty simple. Right, so that first one was nickel. cobalt, chromium. So chromium a little darker than nickel. Just, it reflects light differently. It's really the difference. All right, if we want to make this anisotropic, we want to make it brushed metal. Let me stop this, restart. I'll stick with chromium since I have it here. All right, we go down underneath the specular Fresnel model right here, primary specular. Oh yeah, that's something else I want to point out. Everything we do is going to be in primary specular, not rough specular. Those two controls are exactly the same, and you can get exactly the same controls and same look. I don't know why they have it other than to confuse you. But everything we do is primary specular. So down underneath primary specular advanced, there is our anisotropy. If I turn it to -1, bless you. Let me stop my IPR and restart it again. Doesn't appear that much is happening. Let's turn up the roughness a little bit here. Right, so at 0, everything's pretty neutral. You can see at -1, it's starting to stretch everything horizontally. That means that your roughness is going to be vertical. Let me bump up my roughness just a little bit. Right, so back to 0. If I go to 1, now it starts to stretch everything vertically. That means my brush strokes for anisotropic material are horizontal. Just like they were on my mug here. Right? Horizontal brush strokes, my highlight stretched vertically. The only other thing you need to do is I would change this over to GGX. It creates a little bit of a softer reflection. And then increase the roughness because this is a fairly rough surface. And that highlight you see stretch going all across the top, that is my sun. Direct light highlights get stretched. Kind of looks crazy on the helix. Generally, most common usage for anisotropy is go +1 because most brush strokes, at least with most common materials, are going to be horizontal. You know, the door handles, the kick plates at the bottom, they're horizontal. Although one thing I will say, some of the bathrooms in Full Sail, the soap dispensers, those metal soap dispensers, they go in weird directions. Paper towel dispensers, the metal ones, again, Right, so turn off anisotropy, just put it back to 0. You can keep the GGX if you want. Beckman is the default. You can see the difference right away between the two. Beckman is a whole lot softer. Or I'm sorry, GGX is a whole lot softer than Beckman. So based on your metal, GGX might work a little bit better. Just compare the two with your reference. All right, questions? Does this make sense to you guys? All right, so our look development doc, we tried to give you guys, the basic information you need. When you're looking for look development, that is for material properties. When you guys start looking for textures, you're going to be using the same look development, except you're going to be looking for images you can put on the surfaces. Take a wood grain, put it on a table, make it look like a wooden table. But for now, we are not doing textures. So for example, you'll find look development that may be similar to this. Right? So I found a couple of different images from different sources for my interior scene. So back wall, it's going to be painted. Pillows, couch, coffee table. I kind of like that wooden coffee table. Got reference for the small end table, for mugs, from picture frames, for arm lamp. Exterior scene, I kind of like the wall support color for the back wall, for bread. The chairs, those are director's chairs, so they're meant to be canvas and collapsible. Wine, the wine glass, cheese, candles, wine bottle, tablecloth, cork. All this is my look development. This is going to tell me what color my object is, how reflective it is, and how rough it is. That's all we're looking for at this point. Now, suppose you pick this cushion right here. Actually, let's just look up look development on our own. Right, so if you're looking up for, you're going to start looking at reference images, look development images. First, start off with what is your environment? Somebody pick an environment, inside or outside? Inside. All right, so let's go interior living room designs. So generally you can find interiors that have windows in them that will look similar to what we have. One thing you want to watch out for is make sure you're not using CG reference. Get photo reference. Actual photographic images, not somebody's interpretation. That'll be yours later on. You'll be your interpretation of reality. But for now, let's go with good housekeeping. Why? Because I don't know. All right, I got windows. I got a floor. Suppose I like this for the floor. I hate the white walls. I hate everything else, but I like the floor. So I could use this as look development for just the floor. Now, when I want to go to create this material, since we're not plugging a texture in, this floor clearly has more than one color in it. Right? That's where a texture comes in. When you have something that's more than one color. But what I'm going to do is grab the average color and put that into my diffuse. Remember, diffuse is your primary base color. So for example, let's say, all right, let's try this. Let me go back into my scene. I'll grab the ground plane and I'll start trying to get that to look like my floor. So a couple things I can do. One is, I'm going to keep it on artistic, and I can go into my diffuse color and choose my eyedropper. Now I can come over here to my image and I can try to find a nice kind of average brown, like maybe that. Click on that. Now I've sampled the color. Now I just want to go in and start dialing in how reflective is it and how rough is it. Does that make sense? So the eyedropper is your friend. Now, occasionally the eyedropper will not work. Why? Because it's Maya. So what you can try to do is save your look development to your desktop, load that image into the image tool, and try to sample it out of the image tool. Or, worst comes to worst, open it in Photoshop, get the eyedropper tool, and write down the RGB or HSL numbers. Photoshop uses hue, saturation, and lightness rather than Maya using hue, saturation, and value. Value and lightness are the same thing. Yes? I'm sorry, what? The eyedropper, sure. So, in the diffuse color, if you click once on the color picker, the eyedropper is right here. Click on the eyedropper. As long as you have that kind of floating little color palette that goes with you, you should be able to sample it from anything. Like I said, if for some reason, now I've had this where demos where it completely craps out, will not work. So then I have to load it into the image tool and sample it there. I've had demos where it doesn't work in this mode or in the image tool, and I've had to go into Photoshop. So it depends on how Maya feels that day. If you've angered it, then it will be spiteful. But for now, it seems to be working. So I'm going to go and look at my reflectivity based on areas that I can see. So I can see it's not screaming reflective, but it's not completely diffuse either. So for me, I probably start with how reflective is it? Maybe a third of the way up just to see what happens. So first thing I'm going to do is, let's render this out just to see what my ground plane looks like. All right, so right now it is diffuse. So I know it needs edge color. I'm going to turn my edge color all the way up. And notice what happens. It gives me a sheen like right away, because I'm looking at this kind of at an angle. Now I'm going to turn up a little bit of face color, because without face color, I'm not going to get any reflectivity in these diffuse areas right in front of the camera. So I'll turn that up a little bit. Now, one thing I should know right here is my floor completely smooth. Why? What gives you, what tells you that it's not really smooth? Yeah, reflection. Look at back here near the sofa. That's pretty blurred. So I need to increase my roughness. So I'm going to go with the default of 0.2 and see what that looks like. All right, I can see it's not too bad. Maybe crank it up just a little more, see what I get. So this will be my placeholder to describe my material. So theoretically, when I go to find a texture for it and I throw my texture on there, my material property is done. I've got it set to the amount of reflectivity and roughness that I want, and I'm just going to swap out a solid color for a complex map. Make sense? That's kind of why we do this in passes. Everything is passes. You do lighting in passes, you do materials in passes, you do textures in passes, and you go back and you check your lighting. Because once you start throwing in materials and textures, you're going to have to tweak your lighting a little bit. All right, does this help? Does this make sense? What we're trying to do? Question? All right, so back to look development. So I may like this for the floor. Let's go back in and see if I can find some others. Want to make sure I get just daytime images. All right, not bad. CG Trader, stay away from that. It's probably CG. Yep. Another thing you can do under tools, go to size and larger than 1K. That'll give you nice size images. There's nothing worse than finding the perfect reference to find out it's the size of a postage stamp. Then you try to blow it up to see what it is, and all you get are pixels. So you also want to try to find environments that have windows fairly close. Would help if they were in the same position. Like in the daytime scene, our window's on the left side. But if you find an image with it on the right side, go into Photoshop and flip it, and then you've got it on the right, the correct side. But as long as it's similar to what we have, you need some direct window light in there. Now for nighttime, that's going to be kind of a different animal. You're going to have a lot of artificial light. But you're still going to need the same kind of stuff. You still want to be able to see the color, how reflective is it, and how rough. That's really yellow. Whoa. That's why you always adjust your camera. Yep, CG. No, this guy is actually a photographer. I've been to his website. In fact, I was going to use that as one of the reference images before. All right, now for the exterior scene, because you guys are going to be doing an interior and an exterior, so you can put in things like, all right, outdoor cafe day without that. Start looking around for reference outside. So apparently Tracy likes to go to outdoor cafes, which is nice. Not a bad wall. That might be decent reference if you want to go with a stone wall outside. If you want to go with something like wood, well, there you go. I mean, you got reference. That would be, I wouldn't want to have that. That's terrible to keep up with. I'm lazy, man. That's way too much work. Stone again. Brick. Brick is always another popular material for the wall. So stuff like this would serve as look development. You're going to need several images because not only do you have a table, on the table you've also got a cutting board with some cheese, you've got a wine bottle, you've got a wine glass. So you're going to need to find additional reference. So I would go for, I've got my outdoor cafe now. I might go for, let's go, wine. All right, let's try wine tasting outside. Sure, why not? So nice thing about this is I can see what my liquid looks like outside. Now, we're not going to be doing wine or the glass today. I'm just giving you an example of stuff you can look for. So it might be like a cheese cutting board. Ah, Alme stock photos. So even though it's stock photography, you can still use that as reference. We'll ignore the watermarks. I mean, you're not going to try and use it as textures. So, but this will give you an idea of, as my cutting board outside, there's cheese. There's not necessarily a knife. It's kind of a, looks like it's a dual kind of cutting knife and a fork at the same time. So tablecloth, that might be, oh, I love that tablecloth. Let's do that. So there's your tablecloth too. It's a tart plaid. So you can get an idea of what does that look like outside. This has direct light on it. All right, make sense? All right, somebody pick a prop in one of the rooms. The door. Well, a prop that's visible in the room that you're going to have to find a material for. All right, the chair. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look. Yeah. What's that? Laptops, but that's not in our environment. We're looking for things you're going to have to do inside either the interior or the exterior that we have for you. All right, so yeah, let's go with the chairs. Okay, so should we do sofa or chair? Chair? All right, it's not really an armchair that we have. I mean, the sofa is on the back wall, but the chair in the front is kind of just, doesn't have arms on it, so technically, if we say armchair, we're going to get those big pillowy armchairs that we have. All right, but let's just see. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, that's usually what armchairs are. Ours would be sort of like that. Let's just try cushion chair. Nope, don't want cushion armchair. Let's see. That would be closer. Would be sort of like that without the arms. You could use that technically, I suppose. Now, this would make terrible reference. Why? Well, yeah, absolutely, it's really small, but it's also in the matrix. It's got a completely white background. You have no idea where the direction of the light's coming from. You have no idea how it's lit. I mean, chances are, yeah, it's probably in a studio with a seamless background, but could be CG. A lot of stuff on the internet is CG, especially cars, furniture. That way you can just go and click, it'll change color for you, and it's already built. So let's go cushion chair, living room. How about living room cushion chair? Put your phone on mute, please. Right, so down here might be something we could use. That, I suppose you could use. I mean, you just have to forget the arms and the back because it's a wooden, it's a solid back. That might work, except you'd have to forget about the backs again. That might work. Just got to frame this one, this one. This one, you can see the light direction. Would be nicer if we're in a bigger environment. We could actually see what time of day it is. This, definitely interior, but it looks like it's night. If you're doing the night version of the inside, that might work fine. Again, set your tools up. Stop. Images, tools. Larger than 1K. Makes it much easier. See, that stuff makes my skin crawl because it reminds me of going to my grandmother's house. Except she had plastic all over it. Like, don't dirty it. I'm stuck to it. Alright, so if you want to go for something like that, yep, you can see there's a window. We've got it in the reflections. You can see you can get a pretty good idea of materials, probably wood. You might want to have secondary reference for that. Now you can get additional reference. Like you may find a floor, but you may want to find a couple of versions of it, maybe different angles. Maybe one reference gives you better color, the other one gives you better detail or better reflectivity. So as long as you have a good primary reference, you can have as much secondary reference as you want. Right, again, there's your fabric, there's the wood. It's kind of low res. Probably wouldn't want to do that one. That one might work. It's kind of black lacquer wood on it with fabric. Make sense? Got windows. Yeah, that'd work. And maybe you like the wall. That looks like painted brick in the back. Kind of hard to see, but if you take a look, you can actually see the brick pattern in there. So you might go, oh, I like that for my interior. Because, believe it or not, brick interiors are still very popular. Especially if you've got like a converted industrial, place that's now in condos or apartments. That's real popular to keep the brick in there. Floor, nice rustic wood floor. Pretty diffuse, but that'll give you an idea of what the floor looks like. So, something like that could work for a couple different things. Right, so we could do things like arm lamps. Ideally, you'd want to find something with more than one arm. Something like this. This might work okay for secondary reference, but you'd still want to have it in an environment so you could see what it looks like. Actually, that would be terrible because at 15 by 1500, that's a terrible image. Forget that one. Throw that right out. Now, something like this is possible, but again, you want to find primary reference in an environment. So maybe we do living room arm lamp. This way we can at least get some of these lamps in an environment. So again, something like this might work for secondary. And a lot of times if you go to lighting places, they'll show you different kinds of lamps and furniture. So while that's really cool, you know, we're kind of missing the whole environment thing. It's a nice thing about Google. Every month, everything changes as far as the order of the images and what's available. And that's the terrible thing about Google, too. Whenever you go back for something really good that you found the first time, it's not going to be there. That way, if you find something that remotely interests you, grab it. Because chances are it's not going to be there when you go back. No, I don't want to redirect. All right, so that's in an environment. There's a window. I can see it's kind of that flat metallic painted metal like my bottle here. If that's what you're going after, great. If you want to go more towards brushed metal of some kind, an anisotropic material, keep searching, you'll find it. In fact, you can even narrow living room brushed metal arm lamps. You can get really specific. So that's nice and polished there. Looks like the arm is a little more rough or anisotropic. This is kind of anisotropic too because it looks a little stretched. They fooled me. All right, let's do one more prop. Name it. Outside, inside? Vase? Okay. Now, the vase is going to be part of a set. We're actually going to be adding a couple of more glass objects into the interior next lecture. So the vase, I'll tell you right now, that's going to be clear glass. But when you guys get into the texturing portion, if you want to do that vase, but you want it to be ceramic, feel free to. You can do whatever you want at that point. You know, this exercise is all about, do you understand how to make glass and metal and plastics and wood and just basic materials. But when you get into texturing, absolutely. So let's go vase. Let's go living room vase, because that's the room it's going to be in. There we go. Decorations. And again, tools, size, larger than 1K helps. There we go. Something like this is going to be tough. If you find an image like this. Why? Because it's almost like a multifaceted object where it's got a lot of roughness in it. It's got a lot of different textures and different materials in it too. It would be doable. The only trouble is, in an image like that, you would have to find flat with no lighting in it, because you want to have the lighting come from your environment. You don't want to have lighting baked in from the direction the photographer took the image. So reference, this would work, but then finding the texture is going to be another challenge. Now, here's the thing. If you guys want to do something like you're using this as reference, you get to the texturing portion and you go, whoa, this is way over my head. I really don't want to do this. You can switch when you go to texturing. So don't feel like you're locked in once you say this is my materials. When you actually go to texture, that's a whole nother set of problems. So we understand that. But just look at this stuff for the future. That's the only thing I'm mentioning it now. Let's go back, find another one. So this is kind of a metallic looking vase. You should be able to do that with a simple map and then getting the right material property. It's in an environment, it's, got lighting, we can see it. Yeah.
Can you take reference from our own photos?
Yes, you can. Just make sure that they're decent, they're not blurry, and that you try to put them in the environment similar to what you're trying to do. So absolutely you can take your own reference. Just again, if you're shooting your own reference and you're inside, make sure your camera is adjusted for man-made light. Or unless you're near a window, make sure it's adjusted for outdoor light. It may take a second. You may even have, options in your camera to be able to force it to one or the other. But yeah, if you take it and it's way too yellow, turn off flash too. If you take it, it's going to make it much more yellow than it needs to be. Yeah, that's a good point. If you decide you want to take reference images around full sail, absolutely. If you're thinking of using those maybe later on for textures, like for example, backlot, that's got a ton of great textures like brick and stucco and wood and different kinds of materials. I would suggest you wait, if you're going to try and take texture images, to wait for an overcast day. That way you don't have direct sunlight and shadow. Nice overcast day, the light wraps around everything, it's very diffuse. It doesn't bake any specular highlights in it. Make sense? Questions? Anything not clear? Frank's going to go in lab, Frank's going to go into more detail about look development. He's got a whole soapbox thing he gets on about look development, this is look development. So yeah, he's fun to watch rant. You just wind him up and he goes. All right, make sure I got everything that I wanted to get to today. All right, so we talked about that. We talked about that. One thing I just want to demo real quick before we go is this whole max path length. All right, so let's see. All right, this should work. Come on. Wakey, wakey. There we go. Yeah, turn this off. All right, so now I got nice reflections. All right, let me go into my render settings. And by default, under sampling, integrator, max path length is at 10. But what happens if you are working in an environment where you turned it down to 2? Just to speed up diffuse renders. All right, so see all these extra highlights inside here? All this bounce light, that is missing with the pass choked off at 2. So it's even worse if you accidentally throw 1 in there, thinking, oh, you put 10, but you missed the 10 and you hit the, top of your keyboard or something. So that's what you get. All you get is primary reflectivity. You don't get secondary. We can't see the ground plane. All right, so let's see if this will work. We go back to 2. No, of course not. Don't forget, stop and start your IPR. There's 2. So notice we're missing reflections on the ground at 2. They're there with 10. All right, that's pretty much what I wanted to show you guys. Any questions, anything not clear? All right, so don't worry about glass. Don't worry about the liquid in the wine glass for today. We're going to go over that on Friday. And you guys will be able to, but definitely today is start looking for stuff you want to make your materials out of in your environments. Look for the reference or look development images you're going to need. All right. No questions. Go to lunch. Come back at 11:40.